Welcome to Coach Bennett's podcast, where every run has a purpose, where kindness is hardcore, where this is about running, and this is not about running, where every starting line is a finish line in disguise, where rambling still gets you where you need to be, where pineapple will never ruin your pizza, and the sodas, adult and not adult kind, are always cold, and where there is room on the starting line for everybody. I'm Coach Bennett. Thank you for letting me be a part of your day. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 61 of Coach Bennett's podcast. This one is entitled Diversity Wins. That's right, episode 61, Diversity Wins. Super excited about this one for a number of reasons. One is because it's one of my foundational principles as a coach. That's right. And by the end of this, what you're going to realize is that not only does diversity lead to better running, but it leads to a stronger runner, more exciting running, and just more fun. It's just win-win. That's what it should be called. Diversity wins? Diversity is win-win? I don't know. We're just going to keep it as Diversity Wins because that's kind of a simple title, and my titles tend to get very long and complicated, and this one's pretty straightforward. But before we get into the episode, let me just sneak in here a couple of things about the Olympics in Paris, which started about a week ago. Was it a week ago? It seems like it was a week ago. Maybe it was less than a week. Point is, they've been fantastic. They have been outstanding. My wife and I, that's Coach Tammy, Coach Bennett the Greater, we've been watching the Olympics every single day. We've been watching not only the live coverage, but then we come back and we do the primetime coverage, and we have fallen in love with so many sports and so many athletes and so many teams. I mean, whether it's the rugby sevens or it's surfing or it's skateboarding or it's water polo, handball, still trying to figure out. But, you know, we've got swimming, gymnastics. It has been epic. I'm hoping everyone's watching it because I'll tell you what, you want a way to get better at running without running more? Here's one way. Become a fan of sports. Now, normally I say here, become a fan of the sport, meaning running. But if you're a fan of sports, you're going to become a better runner. Because I think to become a real fan, a true fan of sports, there's a few things that you need, right? I mean, to really be a fan. One is to be a student of the sport that you're watching, which is huge, to have empathy for the athletes that you're watching, to be selfless, really, I think, in some ways, because the spotlight is completely directed on the athletes. At least it should be, and not on the fans. I mean, it should be on the athletes. So what you're doing is you're, I guess, trying to help in some ways. I think that's why we cheer. We want to celebrate them. We want to help them. We want to support them, which makes you a better teammate in many ways, not just to yourself, but to other people. I mean, it is a good reminder of what it takes to be a good teammate, which hopefully you're then kind of recycling and using on yourself when you're out there running. The point is there's a lot of cool stuff that can help you out there on a run, whether you're low on motivation or you're looking for inspiration. I mean, the Olympics, it's right there. It's right there. Whether it's the performances or the backstories, the marathon that it took for them to get to these Olympics, I love it, And I also love the fact that it proves that we can, compete with and not against each other, that we can bring out our own best and at the same time bring out other people's best, and no one is diminished. That's what I think. That's what I love. I mean, anyway, maybe there'll be a podcast or 2 or 6 that I'm sprinkling in some Olympic stuff, or maybe just some straight up, or maybe just one podcast that's just straight up about the Olympics. That's one thing I've talked to Coach Tammy about, is we should do, whether it's a live kind of like Instagram thing, or whether we should just do a podcast separately about the Olympics, some of the things that we've loved so far, and I'm not going to say more importantly, but importantly, also kind of shed some light on the track and field, the athletics portion of the Olympic schedule that's going to be coming up, to get people excited, maybe give some backstory to some of these athletes, some must-see events, and really just have fun celebrating the sport, your sport, that is athletics. At least that's what it's termed in the Olympic program, athletics. You may know it as track and field. Anyway, all right, so let's get into this episode 61, Diversity Wins. Now, if you're a runner, you already know that diversity wins, and I'm going to tell you why you already know that, because you already know we mix things up with our training. We should mix things up with our training. What I mean by that is, you know, if you run, that all of your runs should not be fartlek runs. All of your runs should not be tempo runs. All of your runs should not be long runs. All of your runs should not be easy runs. You already know that bringing diversity into your training is going to make you a better runner. You already know that. Whether you realize you know that or not, you do. And now, I guess since I've told you, everyone out there should be like, oh, you're right. We know we're supposed to mix up our training. We're supposed to have easy runs. We're supposed to have long runs. We're supposed to have speed runs. And within those speed runs, we're supposed to even mix that up with fartlek runs and tempo runs and interval runs and hill runs. And even within the fartlek runs and the tempo runs and the interval runs and the hill workouts, we're supposed to diversify that. The length of the hill, or the steepness of the hill, the length of the interval, the amount of recovery between those intervals, the distance of the tempo run, the duration of the interval workouts. Like, all of these things, we know that. We know with the easy runs, we're supposed to mix up the distance of those easy runs. And we even know that within an easy run, we know that there should be progression and a diversification amongst our long runs, that it's not the same distance every single week. There's going to be a progression, and sometimes that progression is taking a step back and lowering the distance and the duration of the long run. So we already know that there's a diversification in the types of runs that we're going to do, let's say in a given week, that is the proper way, the best way for us to run if we want to improve, if we want to get better. We also know that there are massive benefits to diversifying the type of training that we're doing. We know that our strengths get strengthened. We know that if we're really great at endurance, we know that by having those recovery runs, by having those longer intervals, by having those shorter intervals, maybe with less rest, by having the long runs, whether we're measuring it by distance or duration, we know all of that is going to strengthen our strength, which for this example is endurance. We know that if our strength is speed, that if we're diversifying our training, we know that we are going to be working on our speed. So we know that we are going to be strengthening our strengths. We also know, if we're properly diversifying our training, that we're going to be strengthening our weaknesses. We know that if we're properly diversifying our training, we're not going to ignore our weaknesses. We're not going to put baby in a corner for all of you Dirty Dancing fans. You know what I mean? We're not going to say, oh, endurance is my weakness, so I'm not going to do long runs. I'm not going to do those grinder tempos. I'm just going to ignore it. I'm not going to work on it because I don't want to work on my weaknesses. I'm not going to have diversity in my training because if I have diversity in my training, I may have to deal with some uncomfortable things. No, the diversity in the training makes sure that we work on those things that make us uncomfortable, that we can maybe get more comfortable with being uncomfortable, dealing with those things. And maybe if we work on them enough, maybe, just maybe, what was once uncomfortable for us is now comfortable. And wow, imagine that, getting comfortable with being comfortable. That's another thing that we can talk about at some point. But that's one of the benefits, that the strengths get strengthened, our weaknesses get strengthened. We also know, if we're diversifying our training, if there is diversity in our running, we know that that's going to force us into situations where we're going to have to make adjustments, which will lead to adaptations. We also know that if there's diversity in our training, it's going to lead to adaptations that we're going to make. We're going to have to do modifications in our training. And what that does, it gives us the freedom and the confidence to refresh, renew, and have a rebirth sometimes in our running by putting ourselves in different situations, by starting different runs, by getting through diverse runs, by finishing a diversity of runs. That's what happens. Those adjustments, adaptations, modifications, and again, that freedom and confidence to refresh our running, renew our running, rebirth our running. The other thing that is so utterly beneficial is when you mix things up, well, you end up with a bigger toolbox. You have more clubs in the, metaphorical golf bag, more tricks up your sleeve, more rabbits in your hat. Does that work? I don't know if that works. Usually there's one rabbit in the hat, not multiple rabbits in the hat. But I think you understand what I'm saying. I think maybe this is a good moment to pretend that your training is not diversified. We're going to pretend that there's not diversity in your training. You do recovery runs, okay? Which for some people, depending on the time of the year, they may be limited to doing recovery runs. It may be coming back from an injury. That's okay. I'm going to say that those are exceptions to the rule, those situations. If you're someone who's healthy, and if you're someone who's even looking at running, not as a performance thing, it's not like you're training to race. I think even if you're just running to improve yourself in a way that does not have to do with going faster or going further, having diversity in your training is still the way to run. It's still the best way to train, even if the only reason why you're going for a run is to go for a run for something like, let's choose something that's not performance related to a clock or a distance. You're to alleviate, let's say, some stress in your life or to have some alone time. I still think in the bigger picture, if you're looking for consistency and if you're looking for progression, and progression, again, doesn't have to be performance-based. Progression can just be, I'm becoming a smarter runner, a better runner. I'm enjoying my running more. I'm learning more about myself as a runner, as an athlete, as a person, as a teammate, as a coach. Well, I still think having that diversity in your training, incorporating different types of running, incorporating different intensities, incorporating distances, durations, different terrains, incorporating different purposes, reasons, goals for going for a run. I still think that is the best way, okay? And again, like I mentioned, and then I kind of segued off into this. I know I kind of took a little bit of a turn. I'm getting back on the main road here. When I was talking about diversity in training, diversity in your running is going to give you a bigger toolbox, more clubs in the golf bag, I think. And then I think I brought up something about more rabbits in the hat. This is also really important because when you realize that there are lots of different types of runs that you can do, when there are lots of different things that you can come across on a run and you can handle it, when there are a lot of different places you can run, you belong, that you are comfortable running around, could be a trail, could be a track, it doesn't matter, could be the boardwalk. When you realize this robust diversity in the type of running that you can do and the type of runner you are and the types of runs that you can get into, learn from, be a part of, well, that's going to lead to more excuses to run because we are always surrounded by excuses to not run or excuses to belittle ourselves or diminish what we're trying to do or excuses to not take on a challenge or not set a goal, excuses to not run, okay? Well, by having diversity in your training, it's going to lead to more excuses to run, more purposes to run, more goals you can set, more races if you want to race to run. That's exciting. I tell people a lot of times, especially after fall marathon season, people will say, hey, I did it. I accomplished my goal. I ran a marathon, which is epic, extraordinary, truly extraordinary. 42.2K, 26.2 miles, totally extraordinary. And they'll say, okay, I ran Chicago. What should be my next marathon be? What should I do next? Because, once I'm recovered, I want to get into it again. And I say, well, why does it have to be a marathon? And they look at me and they're like, I don't know what you're saying. And I have to break down for them the fact that, guess what? Just because you ran a marathon doesn't mean you only run marathons. Like, you could run a 5K And it's amazing. A lot of people have never thought of that. They think, well, geez, like the top of the mountain is the marathon. You never want to come off the mountain, do you? And I let them know there are lots of other mountains with totally different views. The top of the 5K mountain is just as epic as the top of the marathon one. It's a lot of fun. You can do it multiple times. You can do it couple weekends in a row. You can't do that with a marathon. It's less time consuming. You can focus more on the speed aspect of it if you want. There's all sorts of things. You can do indoor track. I love bringing that up because the Armory in New York City, 168th Street, 200-meter track, bank track, one of the fastest tracks in the world, they have open community races during the winter. Anyone can show up and race on the indoor track. And I let people know, you should try it. It's like punk rock track and field. Now, these are people who had just finished a fall marathon. And the idea that they could go up to 168th Street, put on a pair of spikes, and yes, you can race in spikes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Why not? If you can run a marathon or a half marathon, you don't think you have what it takes to run an indoor track race in a pair of spikes? Rock and roll, baby. Of course you do. But the idea that they can go from 42.2K on the roads to 800 meters on an indoor track, it's just too much for them. That's too wild. But if diversity is a part of your running and you realize that you're the type of person that can do an 800-meter indoor track race and a 42.2K road race, well, now you suddenly realize there's a lot between the two. And there's a lot on the other sides of those two things. And now suddenly the world of running is available to you. The world of running is calling to you to come to the starting line, not just the world of the marathon, not just the world of the half marathon, the world of running. So if you're bringing diversity into your training, into your running, into the mentality you have about running, you're going to have more excuses to run, more purposes to run. You're going to find that you're going to be setting more goals. And if you're into it, like I said, you're going to be running more races, and they're going to be very diverse races. I hope, because I think it leads to more fun too. Let me tell you a little story. When I was coaching high school, okay, the athletes that I coached, I wanted to be able to run whatever race was raced. So what I'm trying to say here is when they got on a starting line, you give everyone a race plan, but unless you're in control of the pace the entire time, then you're not really totally in control of a race plan. There's lots of other people in the race. They have their race plans. They may want to take it out slow. They may want to take it out fast. There may be a push in the middle. There's all sorts of things that go on. My job as a coach was to make sure that the athlete had maybe a race plan, and maybe had even a B race plan and a C race plan, and even a race plan that involved no plan. Just get in there, have some fun, because we may not be in control of things. And now in order to do that, I had to incorporate a diversity in training in our program so they knew they had what it was going to take to race the way the race went. If it was going to come down to a kick, they were prepared for that. If it was going to be a grinder from the gun, they were prepared for that. If another team was going to screw around and fartlek the darn thing, they were prepared for it. Okay? Maybe they had a strength that lended itself towards one of the plans, but I didn't want them to look at any of the race plans as a weakness. Some were stronger than others, fine. But they were prepared for whatever was going to happen. I would race against, when I was an athlete, and I would coach against coaches who focused on one aspect. Their team was a strength-based team, that was it. Or this was a sit and kick type of team, that was it. And I wonder, why are you limiting how your kids are going to race? Well, you can't train them for everything. I thought, well, you can. Actually, you can train them for everything. And in no way are you diminishing one from the other. I'll tell you that. You can train someone so they are working again on their strengths and working on their weaknesses and have the capability of matching whatever the race is going to call for. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, which you are forced to do as a coach, especially if you have a team. Like I'll just use cross country as an example. We had a lot of different race plans that we had to be able to handle or be able to, call upon. One was, this was a race where I wanted the athletes up front from the gun, leading the pack, controlling the tempo. And there's a lot of different reasons why I may want that. Fine. Our training had to get us in a position where if I said this is going to be our best opportunity to win, it's going to be leading from the front and grinding and controlling that pace and controlling that effort. Okay, we have to do that. I also may say, hey, guess what? Given the considerations that we have to have, given the field that we're racing against, our best opportunity to run our best is going to be being in the pack, following the rhythm of the pack, paying attention to what's happening up front, covering the gaps, but we are going to be in the pack and we're going to slide up through the pack. We are not going to be taking the pace. That's another one. It could be we're sitting and kicking, baby. That's it. We're sitting and kicking. And there were times when, guess what? Our best opportunity for success was going to be us sitting on someone else who was going to be leading, and we were going to kick. So there are opportunities to be proactive with a race plan and be reactive to other people's race plans. You have to train to be able to do that. You have to train to be able to sit and kick or grind from up front. You have to be ready for potentially a flat and fast course, but you also need to be ready for a sloppy and slow course. Some courses are super hilly. Sometimes it's really hot. Sometimes it's cold. What you need to do is get your athletes ready to be ready. Not ready in this one situation, ready for the situations. And that's what diversity in training is going to allow you to do. Now, the question you should be asking is, well, how do you bring diversity into your training? Well, I think it starts by understanding the benefits of it. If you don't understand the benefits of it, you're not going to do it. I've never been one of those coaches that refuses to answer questions that the athletes have. And I know coaches like this where an athlete will say, why are we doing this today? Don't worry about it. Just do it. Just be quiet and get on the line and do it. I think athletes are engaged more in the training if they understand why they're doing it. I think they're going to give you a better effort if they understand why they're doing it, because now they know this is the benefit to doing this workout. If they're confused and wondering if there's a benefit at all, they're probably not going to commit to it the same way they would if they knew this is the benefit. This is the progress I'm going to make by doing this workout the right way. So I think it's important to understand what the benefit of the diversity into your training is, which is why I started the way I did today, to let you know what the benefits are. So when I talk about how to do this, well, you're invested. You understand what the advantages are from having a diverse training program. I think the other thing that's important is you need to admit the disadvantages of not having diversity in your training program. You need to think about all the ways you're limiting yourself by not having diversified training. And that's just as important. It's going to be a heart-to-heart with yourself. Sometimes it's easier to think about, or at least keep your mind open to potential advantages of doing something differently. But it can get very difficult to think of the disadvantages that you're creating by what you are doing now, because that's going to take some self-criticism in order to do that. And nobody really enjoys that. And I'm not saying you need to enjoy being self-critical, but I think you need to get comfortable with doing it because it's a valid, essential part of training, coaching, being a great teammate to yourself and to others. So I think it's twofold. One, admit the advantages of diversity in your training. Acknowledge those advantages. And then have some time where you think about where you are too tunnel vision, where you are too narrow in the way that you're running. Admit those disadvantages, because if you can do that, I'll tell you what, you're going to be more open to the training that you should be doing or that you can try to do. Because remember, this is going to be personalized. It's going to be what's best for you. So you need to be open, which means you also need to be willing to explore, which takes some courage, right? Which you can look at as a challenge. Taking on challenges, it's going to help you become a better runner, because running is a challenge, right? Just starting a run is a challenge. Getting going is a challenge. Keeping on going is a challenge. So just by being more open to exploring different types of training, different ways of running, different purposes to a run, you can look at that as taking on a challenge. And I think as a runner, you realize the benefits of that. I think the other thing that you should do is look for areas in your running, in your training, where your consistency, which is super important, I harp on consistency all the time, but where your consistency is becoming constantly. All right? Consistency is great. Constantly, not so much. Because consistency should lead to increased flexibility. Constantly leads to rigidity. So whereas consistency should be unlocking and freeing you to run in different ways, constantly running the same way is like putting you in a small cage. So be aware and on the lookout for when you're maybe making the mistake of confusing consistency with constantly, all right? And if you can do that, like I said, you're going to be more open to exploration and taking on challenges. The other thing that I think is an easy way of looking at how you can diversify your running is by focusing on becoming a better athlete and not just a better runner. Think about what you're doing to become a better runner. Great. Fantastic. Now think about what are you doing to become a better athlete, because it's just as important, if not more important. I'll tell you what, one of the reasons why it's more important. Runners get hurt pretty easily. Athletes, they're harder to get hurt. So by becoming a better athlete, it's like an insurance policy for the running you're doing. And if you're becoming a better athlete, you're going to be more likely to be stronger than the running you're doing. And if you want to consistently stay healthy, or at least give yourself the best opportunity to consistently stay healthy, you want to be stronger than the training you're doing. A lot of times, people don't become better athletes. They don't become stronger athletes. And as a result, they take on running that now has superseded their ability to handle as just a runner. And since they're not an athlete, or their athleticism has not kept pace with their progression as a runner, well, they get hurt. That's just the simple way of looking at it. They're taking on running that they can't do. So what you want to do is look at the diversity in your training, okay, on how you can become a better athlete so you can become a better runner. Another way that you can diversify your training is let your running be about more than your running. And then your running can help you become better at more than just running. I'm going to say that again because I have something else to say after it too. If you let your running be about more than just your running, then your running can help you get better at more than just your running. And then, you know what that means? That means that more than just running can help you get better at running. So not only is running getting you better at something other than running is getting you better at running. Wow, that's epic. That's huge. That also means a lot of your life not spent running can help you become a better runner. And your running then can help all of that time that you're not spent running just be a better girlfriend, brother, partner, sister, student, teacher. I mean, this is where it can be about running. It can be about more than running. It can be not about running, okay? And that's pretty powerful, all right? The other thing that you can do is look at your week of training or your 2 weeks of training or your month of training. And I've brought this up before. And look at it like, and I'm dating myself, but that's okay, like an epic mixtape. All right. Now, I was a great mixtape maker. So back when I was in high school and even in middle school, you know, at least, well, we'll start in middle school. When I was in middle school, the way that you would make a mixtape, because most of us didn't have those double cassette tape boxes, you know, radios. So you would just have to tape songs off the radio. And sometimes, yes, the DJ would screw it up because they'd come in when there's like 20 seconds left in the song and they'd start talking and you'd be like, oh, it's the worst. But you would put them together and you would try to get them in the right order and boom, you had a mixtape. All right. Then when you had the double cassette tapes, you could take like a song off one tape and put it on the blank tape. And then you'd say, okay, what should this go into? And you'd grab a different artist, and then you'd play one of their songs, and that would be song 2. And you would write it on like pen, on the little paper, little pouch that came with the cassette tape, and you would write down your mixtape, and you'd give it like a cool name, like, Summer Vibes or something like that, And like if you were a great mixtape maker, you were a very popular person. I just got to say, I was pretty great at it. The key here was diversity in the songs. Nobody wanted the same song 9 times. Nobody wanted that. You wanted flow, but you wanted diversity in the songs. You wanted diversity maybe in the tempo, in the voices, in the themes. You wanted to be moved. You could even do this within a genre. So maybe you're like, I'm going to make all sad songs, but you wanted different types of sad songs, You wanted different types. It could be like a sad rock song, and then it could be like a sad power ballad, and then it could be like a sad R&B song, and then, yes, there are sad punk rock songs. But like the point is, you wanted it to be striking in its diversity because it would bring out, the fans that would come out and be like, oh my gosh, this is a great tape. Can I borrow it? Can I tape it myself? And of course, you'd be like, yeah, sure, it's no big deal. But it was such a big deal. You want your training on a week-to-week or monthly basis to be like a great mixtape. You want the diversity of a mixtape, which you can kind of in your head process as, different types of runs, different speeds of runs, different vibes to the runs. Just think of it as a mixtape, And on top of that, don't limit the diversity to be the type of run or the effort of a run or the intensity or distance or duration or even the terrain of a run. Let it be about who you run with. That's a great form of diversity. Sometimes you run alone. Sometimes you run with this run crew. Sometimes you run with this run club. Sometimes you run with family. Sometimes it's, a grandparent that you're going for the first part of your run with because you get to spend some time with them. Sometimes maybe it's with a grandchild or a sister or a brother or a neighbor. So let it be about more than just the type of run. It could also be when you run. If you're someone who's constantly running at the same time of day, see if there's a possibility to mix it up. There might be. And it might not be the same kind of run. Like maybe in the mornings, that's when you have the most time. Well, maybe you have less time in the evening, but it's a different time of day. You're going to have different feelings. You're going to see different things. There's going to be different vibes to a later in the day run than a crack of dawn run. Bring that diversity in there. Why you run, how you're measuring the success of a run. These are all ways to diversify your running. Diversify your metrics of success. And think about that, am I constantly measuring the success of my run based on distance, duration, pace? Is that what I'm doing? Could I maybe simply diversify my running by measuring the success of my run based on whether or not I became a smarter runner as a result of this run? Am I finishing my run as a more intelligent runner? And maybe not just intelligent or smarter about running, but about the runner. Did I learn something about myself on this run? That could be a metric of success. And be a fan and a student of the sport, the entire sport. Because I think when you do that, when you become a fan and a student of the sport, what you're going to realize is there's a lot to this sport that you are not a part of. You're a part from it. And you've heard me play on these words before. I think what you should always be trying to do is look for areas of the sport you can be a part of and not apart from. And the easiest way to do that is to find out, what are you apart from and not a part of? And maybe get uncomfortable and check those things out. Maybe they're not for you, but maybe they are. Maybe it's another rabbit in your hat, right? So be a fan of the sport and a student of the sport. And what you're going to find is just by doing those two things, being a fan and a student of the sport, it immediately calls for diversification. It immediately calls for diversity in the way that you look at the sport, in the way that you live this sport, in the way that you share and celebrate this sport, in the way that you are a part of and not apart from this sport. So that's my challenge to you. How can you diversify your running right now? That's what I want to hear about. Now, what I'm going to do here is hand the baton off to someone else. We have a diversity of voices on this. That's right. Drum roll. Brrrm. Yep. Mindset Minute with the one, the only, Coach Tammy of the Show Up Society. And when her minute is up, I'll be back to thank you and send you off into the great unknown, which is all the other side of a starting line really is, isn't it? It's the great unknown. Nothing guaranteed on the other side, which is why the other side of a starting line is always an opportunity to surprise yourself. And I'll tell you what, with every surprise, you've diversified your life a little bit, which is a good thing because diversity wins, baby. All right, let's get Coach Tammy and the Mindset Minute.
Okay, my tip for you is to get out a pen and paper, draw, let's say, 7 squares on the paper. And every time you try something new, you're going to put a sticker in one of those squares, or an X, or a check mark, or you're going to color it in. Somehow you're going to track that you are going to try 7 different things. Maybe you're trying different foods before you run. Maybe you're trying different locations. Maybe you're trying different running groups. But the key is to let your running be an experiment. You're going to be open to new opportunities to see what works for you and what doesn't. The key about experiments is some of them are not going to work. They're not going to have great results. Cool. Now you know, and you never have to try that one again unless you want to. Some experiments work out even better than you could have imagined. The point is, try a bunch of things. Some of them are going to work, some of them aren't, but at least you'll know that you've tried and you've mixed it up. Have fun.
As always, she crushes it, doesn't she? Unbelievable every single time. I mean, it's just the success rate is 100%. It's fantastic. So thank you, Coach Tammy of the Show Up Society. By the way, there is a link to both Coach Tammy and her podcast in the show notes. She has an unbelievably fantastic, extraordinary podcast that you should be listening to. So check that out. Check out her website. Check out all that she does, because all that she does is pretty awesome. And you're pretty awesome for listening to episode 61 of Coach Bennett's podcast. So thank you for listening. Thank you. I'm going to thank you ahead of time for sharing the podcast with people. I appreciate it. Thank you for rating it. Thank you for reviewing it. Thank you for being a subscriber to it. And thank you for coming back next week for episode 62. Until then, thanks again for listening. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. And I'll meet you on the next starting line. Thank you so much for listening to Coach Bennett's podcast today. And if you're not already following or subscribed to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening, well, I really wish you would, because it helps a lot. Also, check out the show notes, because you'll find a link to Coach Bennett's newsletter, as well as all the social media sites that I'm on. Places like Threads and Facebook and Instagram and Mastodon and YouTube, and even the artist formerly known as Twitter. Whatever that dumpster fire is called today, you'll find a link to it, because I'm on there. Thank you so much again for listening, and until next time, take care of yourself.